in 2004, Amazon had 1.56 million employees, and the total profit of that year after tax was more than $59 billion, which amounts to $37,000 per Amazon worker. So that's $59 billion not going to workers who might need it, or going to public hospitals or veterans or the police or public infrastructure. In this video, I'm going to talk about the fact that under capitalism, work is undervalued, and that the aggregate value of wages is actually less than the real value that workers contribute to production, which is essentially to say that money flows from workers to shareholders rather than the other way around. So I'm going to structure it in three parts. First part is how companies make money from workers. Second part is some consequences of this. And three, responding to a common challenge to the socialist position here. So to part one, how do companies make money? I think it's important to start here because companies pay our wages. And the short answer here is labor. If there are no workers doing any labor, there's no production at all, right? Nothing gets made, no services can be provided. So a company can't grow or make any money. Work creates things of value which can then be sold, right? This is basic. And to get an idea of this, just imagine the stock value of Amazon without Jeff Bezos there versus the stock value of Amazon without any of its workers, right? Obviously, one of them would be way more functional than the other. So yeah, work creates value. But how and why does work create value? Well, money and materials on their own cannot reliably increase in value. So in any production chain, in any economy, work is the ingredient that creates value, right? Otherwise, you just have materials like standing still. So all of Jeff Bezos's like material assets would be worth nothing without any of the workers putting those assets to work, right? So for a specific example, if you have $100 of wood, you'll be hard-pressed, again, to resell that wood at a higher price. But if you get someone to make that wood into a table, then that same pile of wood might be then sold at $300, right? So at time one, there's $100 of value, but at time two, there's $300 of value as labor created the extra $200 of value, right? So the market, therefore, has deemed the value of the carpenter's labor at $200, right? 100 plus 200 is 300, which is the market value of the table. So this is what socialists mean in saying work creates value. So back to the original question, in order for a company to actually make money instead of all of the profits just going to the workers, the owner has to withhold some of that value that the workers created. So an example, given the cost of the material input of wood is our earlier $100 example, and the table sells for $300 again, if the worker is paid $200, which is, remember, the full value of their contribution according to the market, there would be no profit accumulation. And also the managers and investors would not be compensated for their work, which they've done. But instead, if the worker is just paid $150, for example, then the shareholders can make $50 profit off of the worker. So if there were 10 workers, the owners would make $500 profit after turnover. So imagine profits with 100 workers in a company or 500 workers. In 2024, Amazon hired 1.5 million workers. Um, I'm not arguing that investors or managers or CEOs are not deserving of any of this profit. They've obviously done work as well and need to be compensated. I think what's in contention here is the idea that all of the profit should be controlled by the shareholders and CEOs rather than being controlled more democratically by everyone who contributed to it. So there are two consequences of this. All right, let's get to those. In the short term, it means that workers' pay stays flat during spikes in profit. If the product of your work increases in market value or in demand, the subsequent increase in profit goes to the shareholders and not the workers, even though the value of the workers' work has increased. You just get your flat agreed upon wage, right? Again, because the revenue is controlled by the shareholders, it goes to the shareholders first, who retain as much as they want after they've paid you the agreed upon income. Okay, point two, in the long term, workers' pay stays flat during increases in productivity. So here's a stat from the Economic Policy Institute in the US. From 1979 to 2019, annual growth in productivity was 1.4% per year. So on average, the value of every worker's production contribution increased by 1.4% every year. But wages during the same period rose less than half that rate at only 0.6% per year. So money is constantly flowing to shareholders rather than workers. Again, revenue goes to shareholders first, who then distribute, quote unquote, their money in the form of wages. This means that if you're privileged enough to have been born into wealth, then you'll likely get free money for the rest of your life, while everyone else has to negotiate wages that accommodate profits for shareholders. A great example of this is the company Jardines or Jardine Matheson Holdings Limited. It's a British Fortune 500 company that gained its success selling illegal opium to China in the 19th century. After the Chinese government refused to accept more opium into its borders, deeming it dangerous, the founders of this company lobbied the British military to bomb China. And the company, since they don't, I don't think they sell opium anymore. The company's now invested in hotels and other stuff, largely in Hong Kong. And the current owners, many of whom are descendants of the original opium drug lords, still own billions of dollars, right? Because they own the profits. So a common challenge to what I've just said is that because shareholders buy the original inputs and pay off the workers, then the profits should go to them. But there are three quite easy points to make here to rebut this challenge. The first point is that it's not actually really a valid challenge if the premise of capitalist ownership in the first place is under question. That is, you can't say that a capitalist has invested their money if we are arguing whether or not we can count it as their money, since, again, profits are generated off the backs of the labor of workers. The second rebuttal to this challenge is that a lot of money that's invested actually comes from banks, which is borrowed money from workers who put their money in banks. And this obviously came into sharp focus in 2008. Third point, so let's say take the most modest case of one capitalist saving up their own hard-earned money to start a business, right? And then they own that business for a long time and get quite wealthy from that. In this case, after the initial costs have been paid off with some reasonable gain for the original investor, the idea that the owner of the business is still earning money begins to lose meaning, right? Since the sales revenue is not generated solely by them, but by the workers. So I think these 3 points are, I haven't heard them enough, I think, in this debate. So, guys, that's the end of it. That's all from me. I hope you've enjoyed my ramblings as much as possible. I hope that it was useful in some way. Take care, everyone. Stay well. Hopefully, I'll keep making more of these videos. All right, guys. Peace out.